We're going to talk about feelings. So I talked a little bit about this in my presentations, but something I've come to learn through my own leadership experience is the importance of feelings, right? And I really believe that great leaders lead from their heads, their hearts, and their guts. And I'll tell you, as a first-time CEO almost 20 years ago, I had this belief that a leader should be so buttoned up and so composed and just like have it all together. But the issue we were working on was so challenging and so like emotionally hard. And so I remember one day I was in a team meeting and I was so overwhelmed that I broke into tears. And it was all men reporting at me at that time. And I was mortified, right? Like the next day, I was so embarrassed. And I remember my head of operations came to me the next day and he said, Jane, thank you so much for being vulnerable. Because when you're vulnerable, it gives us permission to be vulnerable as well. And he went on to share how exhausted the team was and how taxing the work was. But because I like felt like I had to hold it together all the time, they didn't feel safe to express themselves. So I really learned that day that great leadership requires that we be vulnerable, which requires that we feel all of our feelings, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today is that when we're living in alignment, when we make decisions in which our heads, our hearts, and our guts are all aligned. And so we'll do some like practice on this later so you guys know what that means and what it feels like. But first, let's talk about feelings and the science, right? So the gut brain. Have you guys ever had that like gut feeling, right? You can't explain it, but you just know something deep in your gut. Well, there is science to back that up now. So the gut has its own nervous system in which there are 500 million neurons, right? And the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body, and it connects the spinal cord to the gut. And so science today now shows that 90% of signals travel from the gut to the brain, not the other way around, right? So there's more intelligence going from our gut to our brain than our brain to our gut. And the gut produces 95% of the body's serotonin. And so that really shapes like how we feel, what we're thinking, what we're deciding. And so sometimes when you have that gut feeling, don't just dismiss it. There is real wisdom behind that. Listen to that and tune into the wisdom of that. And similarly, the heart also has its own intelligence and similarly is sending more signals to the brain than vice versa. The heart has 40,000 sensory neurons. And so scientists referred to this as the heart brain. And it's something that is constantly like processing all this information around us and learning in ways that are independent from the brain. I also find this so fascinating that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 5,000 times stronger than the brain, and it actually extends beyond the body. And so what we're feeling in our heart, it actually literally radiates to the people around us, right? And so again, amazing wisdom in the heart. There's a company called HeartMath that is so interesting. They were based out of the city I used to live in, called Santa Cruz. But scientists who have been studying heart intelligence and something called heart rate variability really believe that the heart intelligence is the source of all of our emotional intelligence, right? And so the more we pay attention to the way our hearts is speaking to or guiding us, the greater ability to access this incredible intelligence and guidance more frequently. So sometimes when we are feeling called to do something because of love or because, our heart calls us to do that, again, there's a tremendous amount of wisdom in that. And so what we'll practice a little later on is what does it feel like when all of these intelligence centers are aligned, when our heads, our hearts, and our guts are all aligned. And I'll just plant that seed, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So let's talk about what is emotional intelligence, right? And there's like reams and reams of data showing that this is like the biggest predictor of our success as leaders and in the workplace is how emotionally intelligent we are. But to have emotional intelligence, we need to develop a really clear, accurate definition of what an emotion actually is, and then identify core emotions. So an emotion is just energy in motion. That's literally what an emotion is. And every emotion is correlated with a physical sensation. An emotion lasts no longer than 90 seconds. I think this is so fascinating because if we can just sit with any emotion, even if it's difficult for 90 seconds, then we allow it to flow through us, right? And instead, what we do, as I said in my talk, is we like feel something uncomfortable and we pick up our phone, we go to social media, we, might talk to our friends or get a drink or, maybe even work. But if we can really stay with that emotion, that's what allows us to process it. And so if we could just surf the wave of the emotion as it crests and dissipates, then we allow it again to move through us. And emotions, and this may feel very kindergarten to some of you guys, but it took me a long time to understand what are the wisdom of emotions, because I felt like everything was up here in my brain and my intellect, and that's how I was going to make decisions, right? And I didn't understand the wisdom of emotions. So there are 5 core emotions, and each of them contain a signal to us. Fear shows us something important needs to be known. So wake up, pay attention, right? Sadness shows us that something needs to be let go of, or we need to move on from something. That's why that emotion is present. Joy, something should be celebrated or appreciated. Sometimes as leaders, we don't do this enough. We're so, grinding on our work that we don't take the time to appreciate and celebrate, but that's a really important part of our life cycles. Anger, right? So I think as women, especially, we feel anger is taboo or we want to move away from that. But anger shows us something important, that it's something here is no longer of service or a boundary needs to be set, right? And for those of us who have a hard time saying no, that's the importance of anger. It's telling us stop or no, set that boundary for ourselves. And then a feeling of creativity or sexual energy is that something wants to be birthed or created, right? Something wants to come into this world. And so when we really pay attention to our emotions, not only feeling them, but then thinking through, well, what is this here to show me? And I found that in leaning into this, I actually make much better decisions as a leader and also can empathize with those around me so much more strongly. So the next thing we'll talk about, and these two things are very, very closely linked, is what is integrity, right? Integrity is wholeness, and integrity comes from the Latin word integer, which means wholeness. And so there are 3 parts of integrity that we talk about in this conscious leadership practice that I do. The first is energy management, right? And that's allowing your energy to flow so that you're engaged, you're passionate, you're innovative. It's that unbroken flow of energy and life force. The second part of integrity is congruence. And that means that there is a connection between what you're experiencing and what you're expressing, right? And this is characteristic of the most powerful, effective leaders in my mind. But many leaders and many people in general aren't congruent. So they feel sad or scared on the inside and they're afraid to say it, right? This was a lot of my early days as a leader. I had a feeling and I was really scared to express or show it to those around me for shame or being judged or whatever it might be. But congruence is actually when we experience something and we allow ourselves to express it. And that's what vulnerability is as well, right? And then in alignment, that's the last part of integrity, which means that we are on purpose, right? We're living in our purpose. And that means we know what we're up to in the world and we're being in devotion to our life purpose. That is when we're most in alignment. And sometimes that purpose changes. Like I'm in a career transition right now. So I've gone from embrace. Now I'm doing leadership development and coaching. And so your purpose can change, but it's kind of tuning into what is that purpose? And are we living in alignment with that purpose? So there are 4 pillars of integrity, and I could do a workshop on just each of these on their own, but we'll kind of focus on one today. I'll give the overview, and then we're going to focus today on impeccable agreements. So the 4 pillars of integrity, one we already talked about, emotional intelligence. So this means we welcome all our authentic emotions, no matter how difficult they are, they're all welcome. And we get really curious about what we can learn from our feelings. What are our feelings here to tell us? And the more we step into that space, the more we allow others to experience and express their own feelings, right? We create a safe space for others to do that. So that's pillar one. Pillar two is impeccable agreements. And this means we only make agreements that we truly want to make, right? How many of us here have said yes to something, even though we didn't really want to do it? Probably all of us, right? So an impeccable agreement is like checking in with ourselves and making sure we're only making the agreements that we want to make. And then there are going to be times when something changes or it's not working for us. So it also means change the ones that aren't working, right? Instead of breaking an agreement, we renegotiate or we change something that might not be working for us. And we experience agreements as a source of increased energy, right? Not something we should be doing or we have to be doing. That gets our energy down, but making sure that our agreements lift us up and bring us joy. And they're really things we want to do. The third pillar of integrity is healthy responsibility. So how do we take 100% responsibility for our experiences? And that means not playing the role of the victim, but seeing ourselves as the creator of our experiences, right? So rather than blaming, we understand, how did I contribute to the situation, even if it sucks? And actually, especially when it sucks, what was my role in that as well? How did I co-create the situation? Right. So that's leaning into the curiosity of how we are creating all the results in our lives and being open to learning from all experiences, especially the difficult ones. And as I experienced in my own journey, it was like those really difficult ones that allowed me to grow the most, right? And part of that was taking responsibility for my part of what happened. And then lastly, conscious communication. So how do we listen with the intention of really understanding the other person? Not just listening so that we can wait for our turn to say something, but we're really leaning into like, what is the other person saying and feeling? How do I create that space for them to be seen and understood? And then speaking in a way that is unarguable. And what that means is we talk about our feelings and our experiences, but don't make assumptions about what someone else is thinking or feeling. That is what an unarguable truth is. And notice that your experience is always subjective. It's just your experience, right? But not everyone is going to experience something the same way. And so making, again, space for that. And then committing to reveal and not conceal our authentic experiences. So whatever we're feeling, really making that commitment to, even though it feels very vulnerable and scary sometimes, to be able to express that to the people around us. And I'll pause there for a moment. Are there any questions before I move on? No, and we'll get some real like hands-on experience with the practice of these in a moment. Okay. So let's move on to, as I said, today we're going to focus on just one pillar of this, which is impeccable agreements. And so an impeccable agreement consists of four things. One is just making a really clear agreement with someone, right? So who's going to do what by when? Then keeping those agreements, making sure that we actually do the things we say we're going to do, right? And sometimes that might be renegotiating an agreement. So if you were supposed to get a report to your boss by Friday and all these other things came up, to be proactive in renegotiating and saying, hey, I need a little more time. Can I get this to you by Monday? But when you know that you can't fulfill an agreement, just being proactive about renegotiating what that means. That's being in alignment with our agreements. And then lastly, cleaning up broken agreements. So there are going to be some times when we have broken agreements, right? When we haven't committed to something. And then that requires us proactively taking responsibility and asking the other person, what can I do to repair this? So example, I told you I would talk to Kathy by Friday about the change in her role, and I didn't do that. So I realized breaking this agreement might have damaged trust between us. Is there anything I could do to repair that? Right. And so that requires us be 100% responsible when we haven't kept our agreements, and proactively asking someone, how do we repair that? And as conscious leaders, we want to try to keep 90%, if not 100% of all the agreements we make. 100% might be really hard, but at least 90%. And this means renegotiating agreements as soon as we know we can't keep the agreement, communicating directly. I'll give you an example of this in my own life. I gave a TED talk in Atlanta last week, which was super exciting. And I'd committed the next morning to doing a call at 5 a.m. For work, but I wasn't getting home until really late. My flights hadn't been scheduled yet. And that just really didn't feel good in my body. I knew I was going to be exhausted. I wasn't sure if I could be, present and alert at 5 a.m. And so I called the person who had asked me to do the call. I told her the situation and I said, I committed to doing this, but is there any way, you might be able to take those questions on the call or we could shift the timing? And she looked into it and she got back to me the next day and she said, our part of the presentation actually doesn't happen until later. And so that was a way we renegotiated, that I would still be on the call, but I could join a little later when my presence was really required. And then, as I said, cleaning up broken agreements, take 100% responsibility and do what you can to clean up the broken agreement. Okay, so the chance that we have of making the best decisions that we really keep to, that we hold the commitments that we keep and hold on to, are when our head, our hearts, and our guts are all aligned. When something is a whole body yes, and you're in alignment, you're more likely to be impeccable with your agreements, right? So we're going to practice this over the rest of this session. And I'm going to first take you guys through an exercise where you feel what something feels like in your head, your heart, and your gut. And then we'll practice what it feels like to have a whole body yes and a whole body no. Okay. So the first exercise we'll do is just like recall a time when you came to the logical conclusion that something made sense. Right. And try to come up with an example of that for yourself. I'll give you an example. For me, last year at Embrace, we didn't have a chief financial officer and our finances were getting more complex. And so we realized it was time to bring that person into the organization. So it was a very logical decision. And as you come up with your own example, just notice what it feels like in your body when you think of that memory, just something that like really made sense from an intellectual perspective, right? And for me, that feels like it's very in my head. So I kind of feel that like up here. And I feel like kind of a tingling up here. And I feel like it's really kind of above the neck sensation as I think about a logical conclusion or a logical decision. Okay, so just kind of make a note of that for yourself. And then think of a decision that you made when you felt your heart was really in something, your heart was calling you to do something. So for me, I would say this was probably writing my book. Even the work that I did at Embrace, it didn't make sense intellectually. Like I was moving to India, I had just finished my MBA and my parents really wanted me to get a high paying corporate job. So like intellectually, it didn't make sense necessarily, but something in my heart was calling me to do that. And so as you guys think about this for yourself, think about a moment where your heart is calling you to do something and what that feels like in your body, right? And I actually do feel that kind of in my heart space. I felt warmth and I kind of spreading through my chest, right? So try to take kind of a snapshot or jot a few notes down as to what that feels like in your own body as you're making a heart-based decision. Now, think about vision, and gut is really our power center, and it's our instinct or our intuition, right? And so think to a time where something just felt like this is it. And it might not have made sense intellectually, but something in your gut was telling you, yes, this is it. In my personal life, I was just hanging out with a friend yesterday, and I remember meeting this friend and knowing immediately in my gut, like, this is going to be someone I'm very close to. I didn't know why, we had just met. And sure enough, she's one of my closest friends today. But I felt that, and when I think about the sensation of that, It's like that feeling in the base of my stomach. And there's a centeredness, kind of a groundedness there that shows me that that was a gut decision. So think about that moment for yourself and try to jot down just like a quick note or two. It's like a gut decision that you had, and what did that feel like for you? And again, feel free to like ask questions, jump in, share at any point as I'm doing this. Okay, so the next exercise we're going to do, and then I will have you guys share your experience of this afterwards, is a whole body yes. So now this is like our head, our heart, and our gut are all aligned. Your intellect is saying do something, your heart's calling you to do something, and there's something kind of instinctively that is telling you, yes, I want to do this, right? So for me, a whole body yes was writing my book, right? My intellect was saying, yes, I want to share these lessons. My heart felt like, I felt so much love in sharing what I've learned with the world. And there's something in my gut that just said, absolutely do this, right? It was really calling me. And so all of those were aligned. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do here, we're going to do an exercise. And if you feel comfortable, I'll ask you to close your eyes and we'll do kind of like a visualization as we do this exercise. And I'll ask you guys to tune in to three experiences. One is, what is a whole body yes? What is a whole body no? And then what is a subtle no? And before we do the exercise, I'll explain what a subtle no is. So subtle no is kind of that feeling of like, maybe, like, like you're not sure if you want to do it or not. Probably a lot of decisions fall into this category. But oftentimes like we will do things even if we kind of are hearing this voice in our body, like, I'm not sure, right? And I'll give you an example in my own life that came up very recently. I'm going to Denver on Wednesday. I'm doing a book event there. And I was asked by a group to do a second event the next day. It was a separate group. Now, the old version of me would have said, yes, bring it on. Like I would do like 6 events in a day and get totally burned out. But I listened to my body and something was feeling kind of contracted in my stomach, especially like, I don't know, I might be really tired. I've just come off of like literally 27 events. I'm not sure. And so what that meant for me was just exploring that more. And I checked in with a group that wanted me to do the event. I learned more about it. It was going to be, very, very small group the next day, and ended up deciding not to do it and to do a follow-up virtual event with that group instead. Right. So that was a subtle no. I wasn't sure. There's a part of me that really wanted to do it, a part of me that felt like, maybe not, because I might be really tired. And what that led me to do was explore the decision more and then coming up with something that ended up being the best solution for all of us. So that's what I mean by a subtle no. Okay. So if you feel comfortable, I'm going to ask you guys to close your eyes for a moment. Okay. And just like bring into mind an experience that was a yes. So something that felt really nurturing, something you were excited about, maybe it was a creative project. Maybe it was time you spent with friends or nature. Could be a trip you really wanted to take, even a meal you really wanted to eat. But just think of an experience or a decision you made where everything was aligned. You absolutely wanted to do that thing, right? And as you think about that, just go back to the scene, go back to the images, right? Hear the sounds. And as you're in the scene, pay attention to your body and notice how the body is vibrating when something is an absolute yes, right? Is there a direction that energy is flowing in your body? Is there a sensation, even a sound? Is there a temperature? So for me, when I feel a whole body yes, I almost feel like this straight line of energy going down my body. And I feel a warmth that kind of radiates from my stomach and rises upwards, but it's different for everybody. So just tune into anything that you feel. And this is something something that we hone over time, this wisdom. And so if you don't feel a whole lot, just notice even like some subtle things you might be feeling, right? And this is just giving yourself a map of what is a whole body yes. What does that feel like in our body? Okay, so take a memory shot of that experience for yourself. And then we're going to shake it off. Okay, and then we're going to go into something that's a no. So now bring to mind something you don't want to repeat. Not something like super traumatizing, but maybe something that wasn't like a great use of your time. And you know you wouldn't want to do that thing again, right? Some kind of work experience, a meeting could be a personal experience as well. And so again, as you bring that picture to your mind, just notice the images, notice any sounds you might have heard, notice anything that you feel in your body when something is a very clear no for you, right? For me, it feels like a contraction. And I always feel that in the pit of my stomach, like something is contracting or feels like a little bit uncomfortable. Right? But again, for everyone, it's different. So just notice, is there a vibration? Is energy flowing up or down or not flowing at all? Is there a difference in the temperature you're feeling, right? So again, take a snapshot of that feeling in your body. And then we're going to shake that one off. And we'll do one last, which is a subtle no. Like one of those experiences that's like an I'm not sure I want to do this. Like part of me wants to, part of me doesn't. Right. So come up with a time recently where something was a subtle no. And then again, imagine or just take a picture of what does that feel like in your body? How does the body vibrate? How is the energy flowing or not flowing? Any sensations, tones, sounds? For me, that subtle no feels like it's very subtle, but it feels like a constriction in my chest. And there's a little bit of discomfort, but there's almost like a little flutter that's telling me, pay attention to this, right? Kind of investigate if you want to do this or not. Right. So again, take a picture, a mental picture for yourself of what does that subtle no feel like in your body? Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes and would love to hear a couple like shares for people as to like what they felt and if you felt a difference in your body when it was like a clear yes versus a clear no.